That sound. It still echoes in my mind. The brutal finality of it. The sound of my own door, the door to my sanctuary, slamming in my face. Not by a stranger, not by an intruder, but by the very people who are supposed to be my family. They say blood is thicker than water. Maybe it is. But sometimes, that thick blood can suffocate you, drown you in a sea of entitlement and blatant disregard. And that's exactly what my family tried to do to me. They wanted to use me, my life, my hard work, as a mere stepping stone to elevate their own social standing. They wanted to parade my home, the one I poured my heart and soul into, as their own, to impress a gaggle of pretentious strangers. But little did they know, I had a plan brewing, a silent storm gathering strength within me. And just when they thought they had it all, I changed the locks. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to share a story with you, a story that still makes my blood boil and my heart ache in equal measure. It's a story about family, about betrayal, and ultimately, about taking back what's rightfully yours. You know, we often hear about people being wronged by strangers, by acquaintances. But there's a particular sting, a unique kind of pain, that comes from being betrayed by your own kin. The people you've shared memories with, the people you've trusted, the people you've loved. My story revolves around exactly that kind of betrayal. It started innocently enough, or so I thought at the time. My cousin, let's call her. Oh, I don't know. Let's just say Brenda for now. Brenda has always been a bit ambitious, always chasing after the finer things in life, always trying to climb the social ladder. And honestly, I never begrudged her that. Everyone has their aspirations. Brenda and her husband, Mark, weren't exactly struggling, but they certainly weren't in the same financial league as some of the people they desperately wanted to impress. The elite of our town, the ones with sprawling mansions and invitation-only galas. They'd been trying for ages to break into that circle, to get a coveted invitation to their parties, to be seen and acknowledged by them. And apparently, in their warped minds, the perfect way to do that was to use me. My house. The house I had scrimped and saved for years to buy, the little haven I had painstakingly decorated and made my own. It wasn't a mansion, by any means, but it was comfortable, it was stylish, and most importantly, it was mine. One sunny afternoon, Brenda called me, her voice dripping with unusual sweetness. She wanted to catch up, she said. We met for coffee, and after the initial pleasantries, she started steering the conversation towards my house. How lovely it was, she gushed. How perfectly located. How it had such a charming ambience. I was a little surprised by her sudden interest, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Family compliments each other, right? Wrong. So wrong. A few weeks later, Brenda called again, this time with a more direct request. She and Mark had somehow managed to get on the periphery of this wealthy social group, and one of the key figures, a woman named Mrs. Vandergelt, yes, like from a movie, I know, was rumored to be looking for a venue to host a small, exclusive charity event. And Brenda, in her infinite audacity, had suggested my house. She framed it as a huge opportunity for me, a chance to network and meet influential people. She even had the nerve to say it would be good exposure for my quiet life, I suppose. I was floored. Absolutely speechless. My initial reaction was a resounding no. This was my private space, my sanctuary. I hadn't agreed to turn it into some kind of socialite playground. But Brenda is persistent, like a relentless salesman. She played on our family ties, reminding me of all the times we'd helped each other out, which, in reality, was mostly me helping her out. She painted this elaborate picture of how this one event could change their lives, how it could finally give them the validation they so desperately craved. Mark even chimed in, calling me, his voice unusually smooth and persuasive. They promised they would handle everything, that I wouldn't have to lift a finger. They'd hire caterers, decorators, everything. All I had to do was lend them my house for an evening. Days turned into weeks, filled with their persistent calls and increasingly guilt-tripping messages. They started involving other family members, who, predictably, sided with them. I was portrayed as being selfish and unsupportive. The pressure mounted. I felt cornered, suffocated by their relentless demands and the weight of family expectation. Looking back, I realize I should have stood my ground firmly from the beginning. But I'm not confrontational by nature. I tend to avoid conflict. And they knew that. They exploited my weakness. Finally, worn down and emotionally exhausted, I reluctantly agreed. But a seed of resentment had been planted in my heart, a tiny, bitter seed that would soon blossom into something far more potent than they could ever imagine. The agreement was that they would have the house for one evening. They would set up, host their precious party, and then everything would go back to normal. My normal. The normal they were so casually disrupting. In the weeks leading up to the party, Brenda and Mark were constantly at my house, measuring, planning, bringing over samples of linens and canapes. It felt like an invasion. My personal space was no longer mine. It had been commandeered, taken over by their frantic preparations to impress people who didn't even know I existed. They treated my belongings as mere props, rearranging furniture, hanging gaudy decorations that clashed horribly with my taste. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching as strangers, florists, caterers, event planners traipsed through my living room, discussing their plans as if I weren't even there. The day before the party, the chaos reached its peak. Trucks arrived with tables, chairs, a ridiculously oversized sound system. My quiet street looked like a movie set. Brenda was barking orders, her voice sharp and demanding. Mark was busy directing the placement of some bizarre ice sculpture. I retreated to my bedroom, the only space that still felt remotely like mine, and closed the door. I sat on my bed, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my own things, and a wave of anger washed over me. This wasn't right. This wasn't fair. They had taken my kindness for weakness, my generosity for foolishness. They had not once considered my feelings, my inconvenience, my utter discomfort with their blatant takeover. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep amidst the flurry of activity downstairs, a plan began to form in my mind. It started as a small, rebellious thought, a tiny spark of defiance. But as the hours passed, it grew, fueled by my resentment and my growing sense of injustice. I wouldn't let them get away with this. I wouldn't stand by and watch them use my life to further their own shallow ambitions. I would take back control. I would make them realize the gravity of their actions. The next morning, while Brenda and Mark were out picking up last-minute supplies, I put my plan into action. It was surprisingly simple, yet incredibly effective. I called a locksmith, a reliable, discreet one. I explained that I had misplaced my keys and needed all the locks on my house changed immediately. He was professional and efficient. Within a few hours, every single lock on my doors and windows had been replaced. I paid him in cash and made him promise absolute discretion. As he left, handing me a brand new set of keys, a sense of calm washed over me. The storm within me had found its focus. I spent the rest of the day quietly observing the final preparations for the party. Caterers were setting up in my kitchen, their voices loud and cheerful. Florists were arranging elaborate bouquets. In my living room, their perfume overwhelming. Brenda and Mark were flitting around, stressed but excited, their eyes gleaming with anticipation for the evening ahead. They didn't suspect a thing. They were so consumed by their own little world of social climbing that they were completely oblivious to the quiet revolution that had taken place under their very noses. As dusk began to settle, the first guests started to arrive. Expensive cars lined my street. Women in elegant dresses and men in tailored suits made their way to my front door, their faces expectant. Brenda and Mark stood on the porch, beaming, ready to welcome their esteemed guests into my house. The house they thought they had so cleverly commandeered. And then, the moment I had been waiting for. Brenda reached for the doorknob, a practiced smile already gracing her lips. She turned it. Nothing. She tried again, a little harder this time. Still nothing. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Mark stepped forward, a reassuring hand on her arm. He tried the knob. Locked. Brenda laughed nervously. "That's strange," she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. "I'm sure it's just stuck." She rummaged through her purse, pulling out a set of keys. My old set of keys. She tried each one in turn. None of them worked. Panic started to creep into her eyes. Mark's smile had vanished. More guests were arriving now, forming a small crowd. Brenda's voice was trembling slightly as she called my phone. I watched from my living room window as her name flashed across the screen. I took a deep breath and declined the call. She tried again and again. Each unanswered call added another layer of desperation to her increasingly frantic expression. Finally, Mark started banging on the door. "Hello? Is anyone inside? Open up." His voice was loud, demanding. The guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. This was not the grand entrance they had been expecting. I walked to the front door and peered through the peephole. Brenda and Mark were standing there, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and growing fury. Behind them, the small crowd of would-be partygoers was murmuring amongst themselves. Mrs. Vandergelt looked distinctly unimpressed. Taking another deep breath, I unlocked the door and slowly pulled it open. Brenda and Mark stared at me, their mouths agape. "What's going on?" Brenda finally stammered, her voice laced with disbelief. "Why are the locks changed? Where are the new keys?" I looked at them, my expression calm, almost serene. "These are my locks now," I said quietly, holding up my new set of keys. "And these are my keys?" Mark's face turned red with anger. "What do you mean, your locks? This is supposed to be our party. Mrs. Vandergelt is here." He gestured dramatically to the increasingly impatient woman standing at the edge of the group. "Yes," I said, my gaze shifting to Mrs. Vandergelt. "My apologies, Mrs. Vandergelt. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. My family here," I gestured to Brenda and Mark with a tight smile, "appear to have forgotten that this is my house. And I, unfortunately, haven't authorized any party." A stunned silence fell over the small crowd. Mrs. Vandergelt's frosty demeanor seemed to intensify, if that was even possible. Brenda looked like she was about to faint. Mark's fists were clenched at his sides. You can't do this." Brenda finally shrieked, her voice rising hysterically. "We have everything planned. The caterers, the music. You should have thought of that before you decided to use my home without my explicit permission," I replied, my voice still calm but with an edge of steel. You assumed I would just roll over and let you turn my life upside down for your own selfish gain. You were wrong. The whispers among the guests grew louder. Some looked amused, others looked shocked, and Mrs. Vandergelt, well, her expression was unreadable, but I had a feeling she wasn't exactly thrilled. Mark stepped forward menacingly. "You're going to ruin everything," he hissed. "Do you have any idea who these people are?" "They are people you wanted to impress by pretending my life was yours," I said coolly. "And now they are witnessing the reality." Brenda started to cry, her carefully applied makeup beginning to smudge. "How could you do this to us? We're family." "Family," I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Is that what you call this? Using me, my home, my hard work, without even a second thought? Did you consider my feelings when you were planning your grand social debut?" The confrontation continued for a few more tense minutes, the bewildered guests caught in the middle of this unexpected family drama. Finally, Mrs. Vandergelt, with a curt nod and a pointed remark about unforeseen circumstances, turned and walked back to her car. The rest of the guests quickly followed suit, their initial excitement replaced by awkwardness and a hasty retreat. Soon, Brenda and Mark were the only ones left on my doorstep, their faces a mask of shock and fury. The caterers and florists, who had been watching the drama unfold with a mixture of confusion and amusement, started packing up their things. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and shattered expectations. "I can't believe you did this," Mark said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're going to regret this." "No, Mark," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. "You are the ones who are going to regret this. You took me for granted. You underestimated me. And now, you are facing the consequences of your own actions." I closed the door, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. I leaned against it for a moment, my heart pounding. A wave of exhaustion washed over me, but beneath it, there was a sense of liberation. I had done it. I had taken back control. The immediate aftermath was intense, to say the least. My phone didn't stop ringing. Brenda and Mark bombarded me with angry texts and voicemails, accusing me of being vindictive, cruel, and unforgiving. Other family members chimed in, taking sides, some horrified by my actions, others secretly admitting that Brenda and Mark had gone too far. The family WhatsApp group exploded into a chaotic mess of accusations and justifications. For a while, I felt isolated, ostracized by the very people who had so casually disregarded my feelings. But then something unexpected happened. A few of my other cousins, people who had always been somewhat on the periphery of Brenda and Mark's social climbing antics, reached out to me privately. They confessed that they had always found Brenda and Mark's behavior to be a bit much, their constant need to impress others rather tiresome. They admitted that while they were surprised by my drastic actions, they also understood my frustration. They had witnessed Brenda and Mark's entitlement firsthand, their tendency to steamroll over others in their pursuit of social acceptance. Their messages of support, however hesitant, were balm to my wounded spirit. It made me realize that I wasn't entirely alone in this, that not everyone in the family condoned Brenda and Mark's behavior. And that's the thing about a family crisis, isn't it? It has a way of showing you who is truly on your side. My other cousins, the ones who had stayed silent for so long, had finally found their voice. One of them, Jessica, sent me a text that hit me right in the heart. It simply said, "You did what I wish I had the guts to do." Her words were a lifeline. They made me realize that my actions, however extreme, weren't just about petty revenge. They were about setting a boundary, a clear, unmistakable line that said, "This is mine. You don't get to take it." The immediate fallout was messy, as you can imagine. My parents, who were a little too much under my aunt's influence, Brenda's mom, called me, their voices a mixture of disappointment and frustration. "You've humiliated them in front of the entire town," my mother said, her tone a soft accusation. "Mrs. Vandergelt won't be forgetting this anytime soon. You've ruined their reputation, and by extension, ours." It was always about reputation, wasn't it? Never about the fact that they had so blithely used my home without my full consent. I tried to explain my side, to tell them how hurt I was, but their focus remained on the public spectacle. They just couldn't see past the social embarrassment to the real betrayal. The next morning, I woke up to a new kind of silence. The loud, bustling chaos of the party preparations was gone, replaced by a quiet, empty house. It felt clean again. It felt like mine again. But as I walked through the rooms, a strange feeling crept over me. A feeling of unease. Something was different. It wasn't just the absence of party supplies. It was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I started to notice little things. A picture frame on my mantelpiece that had been moved ever so slightly to the left. A small, decorative box on my coffee table that was now a few inches closer to the edge. It was easy to dismiss these as simple rearrangements from the party planners. But then I went to the small, antique writing desk in my study, a piece passed down from my grandmother. It had a small, secret compartment where I kept a few important documents. I always kept the compartment locked with a tiny, antique key, and as I went to check on it, a cold dread washed over me. The key was gone. The lock had been jimmied open. The compartment was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just about the party. They had been in my house, yes, but for something more, something sinister. I felt a wave of nausea. I immediately called the police. While I was waiting for them to arrive, my mind raced. What could they have taken? The documents weren't particularly valuable in a monetary sense, but they were deeply personal and important. They included my grandmother's last will and testament, detailing a small plot of land she had owned, a property that had been in our family for generations. A property that, according to the will, was to be inherited by me, not Brenda, not Mark, me. When the police arrived, they were professional but skeptical. "Ma'am, are you sure it wasn't just misplaced during all the party planning?" the officer asked, his voice laced with polite doubt. But I knew they had done it. I had to face Brenda and Mark again, not with righteous anger, but with a cold, terrifying certainty. I called them and told them to meet me at my house. Mark answered, his voice a mix of fury and condescension. "What now? Haven't you done enough?" he sneered. "I know what you did," I said, my voice shaking with a controlled rage. "I know you took my grandmother's will." Silence on the other end. A long, chilling silence. Then, Brenda's voice, small and scared. "What are you talking about?" "The secret compartment in the writing desk," I said, my voice growing stronger. "And the key, and the will. Don't lie to me." They finally agreed to meet me, though they insisted it was to clear up this misunderstanding. They arrived an hour later, their bravado from the night before completely gone. They looked tired and defeated, but also afraid. They came inside, and for the first time, I saw my house through new eyes. It wasn't just a home, it was a battlefield. I sat them down and laid out my evidence. The missing key, the jimmied lock, the fact that the will was gone. I told them I had already filed a police report. Mark scoffed, but his eyes darted nervously. Brenda just sat there, her head in her hands, a broken sob escaping her lips. And that's when the twist came. Not from me, but from Brenda. She looked up, her face streaked with tears, and the words tumbled out of her. It wasn't just the will, it was the deed. The deed to the house. This house, Mom and Dad gave it to you, but they never really wanted you to have it. They wanted us to have it. But the will was clear. Grandma made sure of it. My mind reeled. They were talking about my parents. My own parents had secretly been plotting against me. My heart felt like it had been physically torn in two. The plot was bigger and far more cruel than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about social climbing. It was about a deep-seated resentment and a quiet betrayal that had been festering for years. My parents, feeling guilty about a past debt they owed to Brenda's parents, had apparently promised Brenda and Mark the house behind my back. But Grandma's will had foiled their plan. It was the ultimate betrayal, and that was the final piece of the puzzle. Their desperation to get me to loan the house for the party wasn't just about impressing the Vandergelts. It was a cover, a distraction, a way to get unfettered access to my home to find and take the deed to try and legally fight my grandmother's will. The party was just a smokescreen, a ridiculously elaborate, expensive smokescreen. The police came back later that day, and with a little more detail from me and a little less resistance from Brenda and Mark, who seemed to be completely broken by now, they found a hidden document in Mark's car. The deed. My deed. In the end, it wasn't my revenge that truly destroyed them. It was their own greed. The party that wasn't just brought their true motives to light. It exposed the rot that had been festering beneath the surface of my family for years. Brenda and Mark's reputation was, as my mother had feared, ruined. But it was ruined by their own actions, not mine. The wealthy socialites they tried so hard to impress had witnessed firsthand their utter desperation and shamelessness. My parents. Our relationship is still strained. We rarely talk now. They still can't quite understand why I couldn't just let it go and be a good sister. But how could I? They had not only betrayed me but had also dishonored my grandmother's wishes. As for me, I got my house back. And not just physically. I reclaimed it from the quiet, insidious plot that had been swirling around it. I changed more than the locks that day. I changed the way I viewed my family, the way I set my boundaries, and the way I valued my own happiness. My house is a sanctuary again, but this time, it's not just a physical space. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest act of love you can show yourself is to stand your ground and lock the door on those who seek to use you. The wounds are still there, the scars run deep, but they're a constant reminder. A reminder that sometimes the greatest act of family isn't about forgiveness. It's about truth. It's about not letting yourself be erased. And for me, that truth, that clarity, that sense of self-worth, it's more valuable than any fancy party, any social status, or any amount of money in the world. And that's a key that will always be mine. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to stand up for yourself, especially against the people you love, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Remember, your space is your sanctuary. Don't ever let anyone take it from you.